Welcome to Dobbs and Rowe, Queer Gender-Expansive Visions for Healthcare, for Abortion Care. My name is Jessica Semler. I'm a queer borough councilwoman in Etna, which is right across the river from us in Pittsburgh. I work for State Senator Lindsey Williams, and I'm a writer and the former Public Affairs Director for Planned Parenthood of Western Pennsylvania. I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Latasha D. Mays. I use she, her pronouns. For 18 years, I was founder of New Voices for Reproductive Justice, a multi-state organization with a national reputation for building the movement for reproductive justice for Black women, femmes, girls, and gender-expansive folks. From there, I am running for state representative right here in the city of Pittsburgh, in the heart of the city of Pittsburgh, the 24th legislative district. When I win in November, I'll be the first woman to ever hold this seat in over 50 years. I'll be the first out lesbian in the General Assembly. And so I'm excited to be here today and talk about the important intersections of reproductive justice and LGBTQ liberation.
Hi, I'm Corey Fraser. My pronouns are they and them. I am a multiply disabled, non-binary licensed social worker, as well as the co-founder and director of the Pittsburgh Center for Autistic Advocacy. I serve in a number of roles here in the local disability community, as well as in some national roles where I'm regarded as an expert in the intersection of autism and gender diversity.
All right, great. So we really wanted to have this panel because even after Roe was passed in 1973, a lot of folks have never had access to abortion despite it being a right. And with this Dobbs decision, there's some debate over what it looks like for what it's going to be, how it's going to impact queer rights, but regardless, this decision has a direct, immediate impact on LGBTQ people. And so first I want to ask just why did you each want to be part of this discussion and what brought you to your work?
I think the thing that really brought me to the discussion was seeing how this recent decision is already affecting queer healthcare in Pittsburgh. Our abortion providers here in Pittsburgh are also some of our main trans care providers, which means we're already hearing from a lot of trans folks in the city who aren't able to access their hormones because people are, there is an increased demand for folks who are in less abortion-friendly states coming in to Pittsburgh for abortion care. So people are already missing care, and not just folks who need to end a pregnancy. I was also attracted to this discussion because for a number of years, I've been working on a state level where we've seen anti-abortion folks attacking abortion rights in Pennsylvania through the lens of disability by using arguments about the termination rates for pregnancies diagnosed prenatally with Down syndrome. And the position that I've taken for a long time on that is we have to protect the abortion rights of women with Down syndrome who, if folks with Down syndrome become pregnant, are very likely to have a baby with Down syndrome. So if we limit abortion there, we are limiting the rights of women with disabilities and women and other folks with disabilities who can become pregnant.
So for me, I've been doing this work since I was about 19 years old. My rabble-rousing started at the University of Pittsburgh. So I'd say I got my start here in Pittsburgh. And the first work that I found myself being a part of was winning emergency contraception for students at Pitt at night and on the weekend. It was not available after 5 p.m., and it was only available Monday through Friday. So that led me down a journey to what I call my destiny in meeting up with the reproductive justice movement, a movement that was created by 12 Black women in 1994. And so some of you may be hearing more and more about reproductive justice, but please let me ground you in what reproductive justice is. It is the human right of us all to control our bodies, our sexuality, our gender, our work, our reproduction, and the ability to form our families. And that's for everybody living and breathing. It's for everybody in this room. It's for everyone at this conference. But it was created by 12 Black women. And so this is a movement that intersects reproductive rights and social justice, and is rooted in a human rights framework. So when we rely on our legal systems in this country that were never meant to protect or expand rights for Black people, for women and gender-expansive folks, you know, we, as a movement, we have never relied on constitutional rights. We relied on our human rights. And so that is a movement that I have been a part of, proud to be a part of, and proud to have led for about 2 decades. And so this is a fascinating time because we, in our movement for reproductive justice, Black women and folks in particular, we could see that Roe was going to come to an end. But still, none of us were prepared for that moment, for that time. Those of us who are like deeply in it every day still weren't prepared. But those who are never really thinking about it on that level, clearly that sent shockwaves through this nation. And to me, it was important to understand, for us to understand collectively, that Roe was never enough. It was never enough for women, was never enough for Black folks, never enough for LGBTQ folks, gender-expansive and trans and non-binary folks. It was never enough. And so we have the opportunity now to rise out of the ashes of Roe and create what actually is needed in communities. And it is not strictly a legal or constitutional right. It's about our human rights fundamentally. And so that's what drew me to this conversation. And also, you know, I think for me in doing this work for so long, this is the most we've intersected, you know, how this is impacting LGBTQ plus communities and how the language that we use is so limiting and destructive to reproductive freedom when we say a woman's right to choose, because every abortion seeker is not a woman and every woman doesn't have a choice. So we have to really dismantle that language that leaves so many people out in these conversations. And so that's all of that is why I'm here today.
Both of you tapped into a lot of different things that I was thinking. First, Latasha, you were saying that for a lot of folks who maybe don't pay attention very much, this was suddenly a shockwave, like, oh, now things are really bad. When for a lot of us, we know that Roe was always the basement, not the ceiling. Like it was a compromise from the start, and it had nothing to do with access. How do we engage with folks who are just now thinking that this is the beginning of the end of abortion rights and the possible end of some LGBTQ rights that are recently won, but also are kind of framed in a privileged way, like same-sex marriage. That's
so many. I mean, I could say a lot of things in this moment. I think that it's important for us to understand that, you know, the day before Roe was overturned, abortion seekers couldn't afford abortion care. And the day after, or the day of Roe being overturned to this point, there are abortion seekers who still cannot afford their abortions. So there are fundamental, foundational, systemic, intersectional systems of oppression that are putting abortion seekers in this position, whether they have a legal protection or not. And so we are in what's called, you know, I hear people saying an access state versus a state that's banning abortion. You know, Pennsylvania is that in this region. We are a abortion access state for now. But our legislature, which I'm so looking forward to joining next session, is intent and totally focused on, you know, preempting rights, preempting the right to abortion, and also now conflating it with taxpayer dollars as well. So I think that this is still an issue of social justice. It's still an issue of human rights, still an issue of reproductive justice. And we are making large leaps before people are even recognize the urgency and the moment right now before we get to what's going to happen to same-sex marriage, that we haven't even addressed the core purpose that our government told us that we don't control our bodies. That's where we start. That's where we began before we are even looking at what is coming down the pike.
Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just want to kind of echo that I think that the attack on access to abortion is really a piece of a bigger strategy on the right of attacks on bodily autonomy. Because we see these attacks on abortion coming at the same time as the attacks on trans folks' right to live in their bodies. We see this at the same time that states are making puberty suppression and HRT impossible for kids. These are life-saving cares. But at the same time, it's part of also this even bigger picture where those things have I'm a foster parent. About half the kids who come through my house, all of them are trans, but most of them, their county doesn't let them have puberty suppression and HRT to begin with. So understanding that there's abortion and there's trans care and there's LGBT folks marital rights and rights to our chosen family, and all of those things are part of a bigger strategy to create a very controlled carceral world. And we could also go into how that's also related to mass incarceration. These pieces are all part of a puzzle, and I don't think it makes a lot of sense to pull them all out. And that means we have to push, we don't live these single issue lives, and we have to push it back at all of these things simultaneously.
Did you want to respond or add anything onto that? All right. Also, I just want to note, Corey and I know each other from when there was a Down syndrome abortion ban coming up. And I was with Planned Parenthood, and it was obviously very clear this was trying to wedge between abortion access and disabled folks. And you completely opened my eyes to so many things I didn't understand, but it's this intentional tactic to divide people. And that also happens with Black folks and the different things that the right does with the different campaigns. And I think there are a lot of mistakes that people in, I'll say the women's right movement have made. And so there's a lot of needing to own up and take accountability, but also not letting folks divide us. And just how do you, sorry. It seems like folks on the right are really good at sticking together, and they are unified. And I think it's really frustrating hearing from folks on the left who say we need to stick together, vote for Democrats, but we need to actually move more towards the middle, because we are in a fascist state right now. There is no middle. We can't do that. And so how do we engage folks who typically haven't really been acknowledged in our system? Because we need to be over here. We cannot be compromising our values, because, like you said, it's everything.
No, this is not the time for us to negotiate with those who would rather see us dead. This is not the time to play the middle. This is not the time to not say the word abortion. Mm-hmm. And I am heartened, as messed up as everything is, I am heartened by that. I've never heard so many people say abortion now. I'm talking about legislators. I'm talking about, policymakers. We're talking about celebrities and so many folks who have been afraid to just say the word. ashamed and stigmatized to say the word. And that's a tool of the right as well. But I've been heartened to see us even speaking about it openly and in settings that we would normally not hear about it. Like, and I'm not an advocate for corporations, but like to hear, like there's a person I met, her family owns a storage company and they have facilities like in southern states. And so to hear her say, we want to make sure that our employees can have access to abortion and we'll pay for that. That's game changing, y'all. Like this is a time where we shouldn't feel like, oh, what are we going to do? We're going to do what we have always done, which is fight back. But I think this sense of dread we may feel, we have to shake that off because we all are in a position, we all have power wherever we are to make a difference. We're seeing, legislation at the local and municipal level in places we would never imagine. We're seeing states like Kansas, which is where I was born, by the way. Who would have thought that that referendum would go down in flames 2-1 in Republican-controlled, rooted Trump, Kansas? So we shouldn't take that as, wow, everything's going to turn around. We have to take that as this is the fight. No one's going to fight for us but us. So whether you are, a legislator, a policymaker, an organizer, whether you're running a nonprofit, whether you're doing things that are less formal but important in our communities nonetheless, this is the time. And and a person who's just kind of realizing what's going on, this is the time to grab them up, and bring them into the movement. So for those of you who have never heard of the reproductive justice movement before, welcome to it. Like this may be your first day, but I hope it won't be your last day trying to figure out, how you can do more and be more and encourage others to be in a pipeline for leadership and for the fight. It's on us. We can't ever wait for anybody else to deliver us from evil, literally. So we're in a fight of our lives, our literal lives. And so I want to be on the front line with all of you.
Yeah. And I'm going to also, again, echo like what Latasha is saying, especially about the center and needing this idea that we need to move more towards the center. We need to bring in more centrists. Fuck the centrists. It's always, I think, we talk like as we're organizing people, we're trying to organize these people in the center and trying to get them to buy in and trying to get them to value human lives, and they don't. So who else do we pull in? I don't know anybody else who's talking to disabled people, who are talking to kids aging out of the foster system, who's talking to incarcerated folks and folks returning to the outside. Like, there are lots of people who aren't engaged because they don't have the resources to be engaged. The center has plenty of resources, so let's find the people that nobody else thinks are competent enough, white enough, cis enough, straight enough, because we're here. I meet with several hundred autistic adults a year. Many of them need some kind of reproductive care. Many of them aren't getting it. So why aren't we organizing us? I think that's a question I want to ask everyone.
Sorry, that was a lot. Wow. All right. Actually, with this in mind, we were kind of talking a little bit about legislators, and something that I've noticed, which I find really frustrating, is that kind of the big call the day Roe was reversed was, we need to vote. We need to vote. Meanwhile, we've been doing that. And still we don't have, one, we don't have the outcomes that we want. Two, we can vote in November, but people need care and access right now. So for folks who are starting to get engaged, like how would we want them to what would we want them to put their efforts towards?
Voting is foundational. Voting is the first step. It's not the last step. For many years, I led a integrated voter engagement program when I was at New Voices, and we focused on less likely and unlikely voters. I think that's part of this idea that is like, who does our society and our political systems throw away? And so it's like, if you don't vote in every election, you're not worth engaging when it comes down to presidential and midterm elections. And I have seen that from a community organizing and community engagement side. And so, and that's what we say we focused on Black women voters, Black LGBT voters, and folks who were returning home from being incarcerated. We work with them because that's also who we want to be participating and representing in our democracy, but we never thought that was it. That was the only thing they should care about. And so for me, I'm always going to push for voting and integrate it with actual community organizing, and where the people that we are engaging are now becoming leaders in their own right, whether it's formally or informally. So to me, voting is always foundational, but what's uninspiring is that that's all we got. That's all we're hearing. And so we, even on the organizing side, I've been an organizer for decades, and that gets us a long way too. Organizing changes culture, it confronts power, it builds confidence in communities, and then you can hit like a wall with that as well. And I think there's the practical piece that only because of like COVID-19 did organizations like ours, where we were like, we're not a direct service organization, we're an advocacy organization. So, we didn't have those real supports. But in a situation like COVID-19, we had to change our whole organization to really be able to meet the needs of the people that we serve, the people that we wanted to vote, the people that we wanted to organize. And that really brought us to, that helped us to evolve, that we can't ask people to volunteer and organize with us if they don't have a place to live, or food to eat, or feel safe in their communities. And for us specifically, if Black women and folks needed like diapers, menstrual products, emergency contraception, laundry services, those were all things we were able to provide during COVID-19. And so I kind of see it in the same way right now. It's like people actually need concrete supports right now in order to access abortion care, specifically in reproductive health care in particular. So there's efforts like volunteering at one of our two independent abortion clinics. That's not something I've seen ever before in my entire career, and to see the outpouring of people showing up to answer phone lines because people are calling from across the nation to come to Pittsburgh. Something to note is that Pittsburgh is one of the top 5 places that abortion seekers will flock to during this time, specifically being next to Ohio and West Virginia. But I want to clue y'all in, they always been coming from Ohio and West Virginia. We only have 17 independent clinics in Pennsylvania. So it becomes, what is practical? How are we supporting our abortion funds? How are we donating the money we can and the resources we can? How are we making sure that we're volunteering to get people where they need to be? Most of our counties don't have an abortion provider, and Pennsylvania is vast and very hard to navigate. So I think those things are important, as well as creating spaces for people to talk about their abortion stories, for us to have greater intersection and connection with people of all identities and backgrounds who are impacted by this, by the overturn of Roe v. Wade. I think there's so much that we can do. It's also about culture change as well. How are we changing the culture? And part of that is language. But part of that is being unafraid to say what is true, that we all know or love someone that has had an abortion, even if that is, if we're talking about ourselves. So I think those are some concrete ways. And we still do have to advocate for how do we, for example, like medication abortion, how are we making that as accessible as possible if you are compromised medically and can't, you really need to be able to stay home and get things delivered to your home, or if you live in rural parts of this state, how can we make medication abortion available as well as other ways to just bring care directly to people versus always, people having to go to the care that they need. I think that's a different framework that we have an approach. And also, I'm 100% for defunding all of the crisis pregnancy centers in Pennsylvania. They get $7.2 million a year from our state budget. That money should be directed to family planning, contraception, and any other kind of sexual and reproductive health care. They're fake clinics, and they do nothing but they most insidiously undermine abortion care, I believe.
I love, Jess, that you brought up the actions right after that decision came out, right? And the people just talking about voting or hijacking the conversation to talk about the minimum wage. That one got me too. But the voting especially, because I swear if one more white dude with shoes that cost more than I make in a month tells me to vote, I'm not going to vote out of spite. And I have voted in every election since I turned 18. But there's just so much, and I mean, if voting takes 30 seconds, inaccessible as hell. We could definitely do better about that. But it is a thing that is generally low cost for most of us, so do it. If it's accessible to you, if you have the privilege to be documented, to have access to your identity documents, do it. But also there are so many other things we can do. And, as we've talked a lot, the conversation a lot has been how are organizations changing and how have we changed to serve people during COVID-19. And the thing that I hear a lot and the thing that we found ourselves doing is mutual aid. And for a lot of people, that's meant coming up with these mutual aid funds, and we've done a little bit of that. But more than that, mutual aid is knowing our neighbors and being there. It's, everybody on Facebook said, come go camping with me. But sometimes it is actually driving your friend to McGee because that's the only place that actually dispenses the abortion pill. And sometimes it's doing, I think we have to build systems where we support each other outside of the governmental systems because they are not here to save us. They are here to enforce the status quo and get paid. So when Allegheny Reproductive did things like had a workshop about a specific abortion procedure that isn't too hard for most people to learn how to do. I think those things are revolutionary. Figuring out that you can probably find somewhere online to get misoprostol to have, or you can buy Ella ahead of time. Those things, having those things on hand, knowing, having a plan that is not the Democrats are going to save us. That's if we could all just do that, things would be so much better because the Democrats are not going to save us. And I'm a registered Democrat, not going to save you.
I'm not going to save you either as
I'll try.
future elected leader.
If you're my neighbor, hell yes, I will give you the money that I can spare to get your needs met. I will have a friend drive you. I don't drive. I'll take the bus with you. I will go to appointments with you. I go to appointments with the disabled community members all the time because sometimes the thing that for people to get the care they need is for someone to hold their hand and translate. And we can all do some of that.
Both of you kind of talked about how things have changed during the COVID pandemic, and I think one of the most clear things was that these systems are not here. They're not doing anything for us. We have to take care of each other. With that, this might be a little touchy thing to say, but it makes me think about how for so long in the reproductive rights movement, so much of the line was Roe is the law of the land. This is a legal right that we have. And frankly, people deserve abortions, and if there's mutual aid for us to get folks those things outside of the law, I think that's an important thing to do, and it's so frustrating. But I think it's really showing a lot of folks who thought our systems, to some degree, that we could trust them, that we cannot, and that we really do just have each other.
Well, I wanted to say, to build on what you said, Corey, is like one of the things that was brought to my attention, I wasn't even thinking about it, was there's going to be a UPMC rally tomorrow, and as one of the largest employers in the state, in the region, and they were like silent after Roe v. Wade was overturned. And so students and faculty members and healthcare providers and doctors basically called them to the carpet to be like, in this moment, we need to be training more healthcare providers to provide abortions. And that this institution, this behemoth institution, is beholden to this community and its staffers and its patients and its and the stakeholders in our community to do that. And so that's like a huge opportunity for us, because we are working with a very limited and overextended infrastructure already. So then that means we need to have more people who can provide abortions. How do we do that? It's hard to have a freestanding abortion clinic in Pennsylvania because of all of the legislation that has been passed over the last decade, including TRAP laws, targeted regulations of abortion providers, which requires all of these extensive renovations that independent providers could never maintain. And so we saw the number of abortion clinics in this state plummet over the last decade. But how do we change? Then again, it's about how do we get the care to people if we can't have them come to us? If they can't get to a freestanding clinic, how are we supporting self-managed abortion? And so those things were feisty and spicy to say like 2 years ago. But it was in anticipation, again, of a legal right that, we could never really depend on if we are not at the center of power in any way based on who we are and our proximity to power, social, economic, and political power. That had to be the way, that we have to take care of ourselves and take care of others. And so I'm here for anything that's going to get care, abortion care, health care, trans care, whatever it takes. I'm here to support it, and in any way that it can be supported through the dollars that we generate with our taxes, I want to see that happen.
That being said, Medicaid should cover abortions, and it currently doesn't. And now there's a lawsuit against the Pennsylvania Department of Health to change that. And that was one of the big things. Immediately after Roe v. Wade happened, the Hyde Amendment, and the Congressman Hyde, who, the namesake of the bill, basically he said, we can't stop everyone from getting abortions, but this is who we can stop. So let's stop poor women from having abortions.
Absolutely, and that was one of the last things I did at New Voices. We submitted our groundbreaking reproductive justice amicus brief. An amicus brief is a friend of the court brief to say why you support or oppose a certain case. We, of course, supported the plaintiffs in Allegheny Reproductive Health Center versus the Pennsylvania Department of Human Services to basically say that Medicaid is racist and is racist. It is discriminatory based on gender, based on income, and we should be expanding health care, not limiting health care. And we talked about all the different types of Black women, femmes, girls, and folks who are impacted by not having access to the full array of care that can be offered through Medicaid. And so now that case started off in Commonwealth Court and now has now is being reviewed and considered by Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And so that also spurred the constitutional amendment that Republicans introduced on the last day of session. So they added the part about, they want to add in the Constitution that no taxpayer dollars can be used for abortion, which all of that is the case right now, but it's this Supreme Court case that they're trying to kind of circumvent by putting that language in the constitutional amendment. So we have to look at all the ways they're very tricky and very, deceptive in how they approach, the law, but also, what kind of care that Pennsylvanians across all backgrounds can receive.
With that, adding the language to the constitutional amendment, the legislature was in session for hours and hours and hours. They didn't introduce this until after 10 p.m. at night. They try to do it with as little folks paying attention as possible. And I think it's also connected to the fact, Corey, what you were saying about voting being accessible. We were able to get mail-in voting here, and the Republicans in the state have tried so many times to stop that, whether it's throwing out ballots that are written a certain way, throwing out ballots that don't have that are naked ballots. Like, oh, well, the ballot isn't in the envelope that's in the other ballot, so your vote shouldn't count. And so it's just very clear that this is about, they know where we stand, they know where people are, so it's just about depressing that as much as possible.
Absolutely. And doing it in the cover of night. It's just, the leader of the Democrats in the House had a viral video talking about how they as legislators were silenced on the floor but to talk about this proposed constitutional amendment. And the Republicans, their position was like, nothing will be different. It's not, just trust us. Everything will be the same. Like, why would you think in a bazillion trillion years that we would trust you with the right to control our body when you've shown us in every way that you don't want to see that happen? But the constitutional amendment is contingent upon their ability to, one, retain control of the House and Senate, and of course they want to win the governor's race. And at that point, I might not be able to take my seat if it looks like that, because that's an impossible position. We all need to be getting the hell out of Pennsylvania if that's the case. But if we're able to flip the House, when we win the governor's race, that puts us in a position to defend and beat back a constitutional amendment. If we don't do that, if say we win the governor's race and the House remains controlled by Republicans, then they're going to introduce this constitutional amendment again for a second session. And then that means it will be on the ballot in May 2023 during one of our most low turnout years. And so that is what we're facing in Pennsylvania. That's what other states will face. And so that's part of the fight. That's the organizing piece of it. That's the legislative piece of it. But they're going for the jugular. They want to change the Constitution, and they're moving quickly to do that.
Do you want to add anything, Corey?
I'm just thinking, I think there's a piece there as well about Medicaid and about how if Medicaid is limited from paying for abortion, which it has been since the Hyde Amendment, and I'm just thinking about how the community trauma and the burnout, and we've been talking about burnout for 3+ years now, and then some, but what does it mean when, trans folks and Black and brown and indigenous folks and poor folks, we're hyper-vigilant, we're it's a kind of trauma that, we see again and again and again and again, but now it's continuing to be policy, and there's just never a break. And how does that affect us as a movement and our ability to organize?
It affects us a great deal. And often, again, it's on the backs of Black folks, Black women in particular, Black trans folks who are, we are standing in the gap of every issue. And while the face of repro movements is still white women, just so you all know, it's Black women who have preserved your right to control your body these last 14 to 15 years. It's the wins around healthcare access, the wins around LGBTQ health and rights. It's the wins around environmental justice. It's the wins around expanding contraceptive care. It's the wins around disability rights. Those efforts are largely being led by Black people, and we are standing in the gap for you. And so we need more people in the gap so Black and brown folks can take a breath. We don't even get the rest, but it'd be nice to take a rest. And we don't get that. And that constant resistance, it doesn't help us in the long term. if we burn out. People leave our movements every day. They leave our organizations every day because of the grind and no relief in sight.
And I think piece of, I think where I was going was about the social safety net, and like the inadequacy of Medicaid as it is. Like, how much more work could our people do if they had dental insurance that wasn't just getting their teeth pulled out? Because that's what we have on Medicaid right now. Like, if we had a social safety net that like paid more than $194 a month for a family to eat, maybe we could fight these things a little more effectively.
Absolutely.
So we actually only have time for a couple questions. Does anyone have a question?
Hi. First of all, such an incredible panel. My favorite panel that I've been to all day. You guys are all great.
Thank you.
As I was sitting listening to you speak, I think about how, like, I work in a coalition, and we have this attitude of, like, a big tent, you know, like, we have to let everyone in. We don't want to be, like, litmus testing people to, like, be in our coalition. But, like, I just feel like abortion access is the one thing that always becomes, like, oh, let people who aren't pro-abortion into the tent in a way that, like, people who don't believe climate change exists do not get invited into the tent. You know what I mean? And so it's like, why is it that abortion is always on the chopping block? And I guess sort of like, what would you say to people who say, like, we have to have the big tent to get things like the IRA passed? We have to work with people who don't believe, like, that everyone has the right to control their own body. Like, how do you respond to that, especially since looking around this room, you know, it's like, this is a sparsely like attended panel. It's like, you know what I mean? It seems like if we shut out the tent, like, we have less, you know what I mean? If we only, like, allow in the people who believe in our right to control our own bodies, then, like, are we shutting everyone out, you know? Like, how do you sort of navigate coalition dynamics like that? Not that that's something I believe, but it's just something I hear a lot at work, and I'm trying to think, like, how to approach that, you know?
I'm going to repeat your question again for the camera. But basically, when it comes to coalition building, oftentimes abortion comes up as the one topic that's kind of like pushed to the side for folks to keep a big tent, to keep people involved. And why is that? Well, we know why that is. But how do we respond to that and tackle that?
I mean, I would say that's why Roe v. Wade was overturned. Because we weren't willing to fight for it as the primary issue in our coalitions at all levels. In my experience, it is always the last issue to really be considered or get the same kind of priority, resources, attention. I was like, oh no, these things are more important. When our ability to control our bodies for all of us, to me, is top priority. But, you know, when you allow people in and we are not clear about what the floor is, then you have the opportunity. That's the when our opponents have the opportunity to erode our coalitions and erode our progress. And that's what's happened for the last 50 years. Because we were okay that poor black women could not get an abortion with the Hyde Amendment. We were okay with that. We are okay with the Abortion Control Act in 1992 here in Pennsylvania, where you have to get permission from your husband to get an abortion. That we're okay with the compromise in Planned Parenthood versus Casey. We're okay with putting the most marginalized of us to throw us away in our coalitions and in our campaigns. We always want to win, but we're losing people along the way with these wins. And the victory is not for those who actually need it the most. And so that's where I'm going to blame white women specifically, and reproductive rights, mainstream reproductive rights movement specifically, you know, for their commitment to winning, but their commitment not to ensuring that those who were at the center, those who needed abortion access the most, were at the center. And not to say that black women have always been resisting the attacks on abortion rights, abortion access, abortion justice. So we have so many ways to talk about it now. But then there are other intersectional either issues or cultural things that block our ability to, have been blocking our ability to talk about this issue in Black communities. And so a reproductive justice movement has been a bridge and a platform to say, okay, your issue is LGBTQ rights, but this is how the abortion access impacts that. Your issue is raising the minimum wage. This is how that's connected to abortion access. Fair work week. This is how that's connected to abortion access. And making we never have looked at abortion as the only thing in our movement, but it is always central, and we are never ceding any ground on that. And I believe that's why our reproductive justice movement has been successful. So in coalitions, for me, if there's not a standard, there's not a coalition. We're failed from the start.
We don't have time for any other questions, but Corey, do you want to respond as well? And then we're going to...
Yeah, I just wanted to, I almost rephrased because I think that good coalition building starts with values, not with a bunch of organizations, but with values. Mm-hmm. And everybody has to be on board with those values. And if abortion isn't on that list of values, what are you doing? And I'm just going to lose words now.
Okay.
But, and I think it goes back to that conversation we had about organizing the middle. So we can always bring back, we can get lots of people in the room and we can have this not very meaningful win, or we can leave the people out who don't value our bodily autonomy and because there are lots of people who do. And why aren't we inviting them to the coalitions?
All right, I think that's a good place to end because we also ran out of time. But this was really great. Thank you, Latasha and Corey. It's always wonderful to hear both of you talk. This was a wonderful discussion. And I guess the ending is bring everybody in who shares our values.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us
you.
today.